Less than 6 weeks ago, more than 50,000 of America's sons and daughters in uniform launched Operation Epic Fury and embarked on a mission of profound consequence. We set out to dismantle the Iranian regime's ability to project power beyond its own borders, and we clearly accomplished this task.
That was Admiral Brad Cooper yesterday, convincing all of us that this war was basically over, that we had decimated everything that Iranians had. And he went down a long laundry list of a lot of things. General Dan Kane from the podium at the Pentagon a couple of days before that talked in very detail about all these things that have been destroyed. And basically, Iran was just a smoking hulk. But is that the case? Is it the case that they have been militarily defeated and much, much weaker today, which is what we're claiming? Well, our guest today says maybe not so much, and we need to rethink some of that. We have back with us today Alastair Crooke, former British diplomat and MI6 officer with decades of experience in the Middle East and European security affairs. He also served as a senior advisor to the European Union, and he is the founder of the Conflicts Forum, which is a kind of a go-to forum these days where you need to find out what's going on with all these conflicts, which you can find on Substack. Mr. Crooke, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to join you again.
It's always a delight to have you here. And let's just jump right into it, because one of the reasons we wanted to juxtapose what the CENTCOM commander had said about all the destruction that had been happening and how weak Iran was. And you kind of had something that's a little bit different on that Conflicts Forum headline there. Gary, if you can toss that back up for a second. You say this, the 10-point Iranian framework and the empowering of Iran. So with all of that destruction, and certainly there's a lot of truth to what the Admiral said, there have been somewhere around 14,000 targets that have been attacked and many have destroyed by the United States. Upon what basis do you suggest that they are being empowered?
Well, I'd first of all say I would take what he just said and really more or less turn it on its head. Yes, lots and lots of naval resources were put in the Persian Gulf area. And what's happened? They've been seen off. They've been moved. They're moved so far away from from the Persian Gulf that they can't fly their strike craft from the deck anymore, because it would require refueling over the target, and that's an unacceptable risk. So they are just pushed out of the picture. So the naval assets that he said, are there and have been very successful in stopping Iran projecting its power. Well, it's Iran projecting its power in the naval areas around Hormuz, not the United States. And Iran is presenting its naval power in an asymmetrical way with, if you like, submersible drones, small mosquito attack boats, all of these things, plus artillery. And then the second thing that he suggested was that we've succeeded completing the task of preventing Iran from projecting force. Well, I'm sorry, General, or Admiral as he is, I think, I'm very sorry, but actually it's you that have had your bases destroyed. Nearly 17 bases have been destroyed, and your ability to project power from the Persian Gulf has been actually fundamentally upended and destroyed. I think there's only a small percentage of it left. And as to the bombardment of Iran and destroying their missile capability, there's no evidence that you've succeeded in that. And there is a substantive evidence that, in fact, during this period, Iran has sustained its missile capacity. And paradoxically, before this war, Iran bought a huge number of decoys from China. Very lifelike decoys, very effective decoys of missiles and aircraft. But the Chinese added something, which I didn't know until recently, but it's a great twist to it. They had a heating element in these decoys. So they actually gave off heat. So for sensors, remote sensors in these drones flying overhead and from certain radars and others, they will appear very lifelike, and they will appear, to be a real target because they're giving off a heat signal. So I think most of what's happened has been the destruction much more of these decoys than it has been of aircraft or missiles. And in fact, the major sort of missile centers, like the one that is up in the cave, in the mountain, most of them are buried under mountains, but one that has been attacked incessantly by the Americans, and that's it exactly, that one that you're presenting on the screen now. That's 850 meters down, and all these missiles that you can see there are hitting granite rock. Now, the rock gets blackened and a little bit dented, but they're not reaching down below. And the system down there, the missiles are rolled out on the railway track. There is an airtight door that opens. They come to the entrance. The missile is fired directly off the railway system, or directly up through a maze of, if you like, silos that reach up to pass out of the mountain in different directions. So these have been more or less untouched. The other thing that the Iranians did since the 12-day war was that they discovered that some of their missile production capacities were exposed and were attacked during that period. So they moved large elements of them underground. And so they continuing to manufacture new missiles, even as this war has been going on.
And we're actually showing a video, a really remarkable one on the screen right now that shows how a lot of that done. This is about a 10-minute video later on from beyond what we have here. It actually shows how they assemble and construct these things, manufacture them under the ground as well. And when I got to ask the question, when I see General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in these briefings he has with Secretary Hegseth, and he straight up said, we have virtually destroyed all of their drone making capacity and like 90% or 80% of their missile making capacity. And yet, we can't get down to this area here for that diagram you just described. And one wonders, why do we keep claiming over and over we've done this? Because you can say it all day long, but when these things keep on firing, it's going to be evident that you're not telling the truth.
Well, you have it exactly right. I mean, this is a strategic defeat, essentially. And it's very difficult for people like General Kane or the Admiral Cooper to admit such a thing. And so they just say things that are not true. I remember listening and watching the cabinet meeting that was taking place, Trump's cabinet meeting. And during this, Hegseth turned to the president and he said, listen, over Hormuz, we have absolute air superiority, no problem, 100% domination of the airstream. We can fly helicopters or other aircraft up to land troops in Hormuz, no problem at all. Well, with that degree of just lying, it's not surprising this has ended up in a debacle, a serious debacle. If you want a comparison, you've put up there the photograph of some of the aircraft that were destroyed in the attempt to seize the enriched uranium from Isfahan. And there's a parallel photograph that is put up, which is circulating on the internet, which shows, if you like, goes back to 1980 and is almost exactly similar of the rotor blades all damaged and bent, but it's actually Mr. Carter's attempt to rescue the hostages. And we know what that did to Mr. Carter's election prospects. It destroyed his presidency. And so, is this another 1980s type of affair? This was the one, if you like, exit ramp that Trump was hoping for. He always said it. He wanted a quick war, in, boom, out. And clearly, this was what was supposed to happen. I think over that weekend, the Easter weekend, when the markets were shut, the forces were clearly being assembled in the Gulf area, and were preparing special forces to go and seize it. And then, of course, there was the loss of the F-15, and it complicated things, and everything went downhill from that point, and it was a disaster. And instead of being able to have them come back on the Sunday and hold up, I don't think they probably actually touch it, but they would hold it or present it and say, this is the enriched uranium, and now we've stopped the Iranian ability to manufacture any bomb. This is a big win. And that's why I think he got very angry, and we got this very ugly sort of announcement that he was going to destroy the civilization, a civilization which would never recover again if this Hormuz was not opened within 48 hours. So that's where we are, and we're on the verge of possibly, of course, that changed very rapidly, and there was the acceptance of the 10-point plan that the Iranians put forward, which was quite surprising that Trump could say that he regarded this as a realistic bargaining point, which he did.
Let me ask you on that point there, because there's a lot of confusion about that. So first of all, when the 10-point plan first came out, the Wall Street Journal was reporting, and we showed it here on our show that day, that Trump just dismissed it. He said, I mean, there's some good things, I guess, but it's not good enough, and just dismissed it out of hand. And then the very next day, he comes and says, you know what, that actually is a good basis let's go ahead and have a ceasefire. That can serve as a basis for it. And then when people started actually pulling that plan out and looking at it, they're like, wow, these are all for Iran's side. This almost requires capitulation on our side. And then the White House walked it back and says, no. That's fake news by CNN. That's not the real list. We got a different 10-point list in private. So they're saying one thing in public and another thing in private, and those 10 points are more like our 15 points. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's very difficult to say that, but I mean, quite clearly the 10 points were, as you say, they were actually, carefully drawn up by the Iranians, by the Security Council after deliberations. They were then presented to the Supreme Leader, who read them and amended a few details and then gave them their imprimatur. So they were a very serious document, a serious proposal made by Iran. And I think, given what I've just said a little earlier, I mean, it's quite clear this has been something of this war has been, it may have been not so long. Obviously, Trump expected it to be shorter still, but he needs an exit ramp from this. And he was looking for an exit ramp. Isfahan uranium was plan B, that he would come up with that, declare victory, close down the war with saying he'd stopped forever the possibility of a nuclear weapon. And then, of course, it now then runs up, and the consequence of that failure is that he runs up against his own deadline, which was 4 to 6 weeks. We've got to have this absolutely done and dusted, because then I've got to turn my attention to the midterms, which are not going very well. And so he said he's very concerned. And this was the meeting, I gather, that took place, saying, for goodness sake, we've got to finish it off. And I think Vance was working very hard. That's what I hear. Vance was working very hard, sort of up all night, trying to get some sort of pause in the conflict agreed so that there could be a negotiation. And it was very clearly in the Iranian proposal, written proposal, which of course Trump had, because it was given by them to the Pakistanis, his favorite field marshal, as he calls him, who sent it to the Americans. So they clearly had it. There's no question about it. And there's no question about what's in it. We know what's in it. And I mean, the numbering may be different from one to another, but the contents will have been the same. And then at that point, then something happened. What happened was that suddenly there was a telephone call from Netanyahu. It's well detailed we've just today, we're doing one of our selections of what's in the Hebrew press for our Substack. And it's quite clear that, Netanyahu suddenly woke up and thought, but, it doesn't provide for the disarmament of Hezbollah. And so he rang up Trump and said, no, it doesn't apply to Lebanon. And to prove the point, he then embarked on this attack on the infrastructure of Lebanon. It was an attack on Hezbollah. It might have been an attack on one Hezbollah member, but most of their military people have gone dark. The Israelis don't know who they are, but they were bombing, tower blocks with people living in them. They were taking down, multi-story flats, apartments, and destroying them with the people inside them. It was horrific. I don't know how many have died. Hundreds, 300-400 dead, but altogether about 1,000 have been wounded. It all done in 10 minutes, apparently. 150 strikes, bombings done in 10 minutes. So you can imagine just how targeted and how precise that was when you suddenly get an order to fire.
And by the way, that
on
a map here, that image there, it was virtually an entire village wiped out, and that's where the village is. It's just north of the border with the Israeli side, and it appears that they're just doing, I don't know if you call it ethnic cleansing or not, but just cleansing. It looks like they're trying to just wipe out everything in the border area to, I don't know, give themselves more security or maybe seize more land. I'm not clear, but it's pretty clearly not a military target. There's no military utility to this whatsoever. This is purely just a village that's been wiped out.
It looks to me like Bin Shubail. Is it Bin Shubail? I think it's probably Bin Shubail down by the border, which was the site of quite intense fighting. I was there in 2006 when Hezbollah, it was not far from Bin Shubail that they destroyed a whole column of Mech covert tanks down there. So what the bombing raid was something different. It's quite clear because we've been going through this very carefully, at least Aisling has, looking at the Hebrew press. First of all, it suddenly came. Netanyahu suddenly announced, we can't have this. We can't have a ceasefire for Lebanon being part of, because the Iranian proposal, let us be very clear, it was simple. Ceasefire for all or ceasefire for none. So you either have all or we're not coming to the negotiations. And Netanyahu sort of erupted at that point, and he said, well, we can't have that. There's no ceasefire for Lebanon. He called Trump, and Trump then reversed himself and said, no, Lebanon was never included. It was misunderstanding by the Iranians, even though that was said by all, from the Pakistanis said it, the mediators said it, everyone said that. But after the call from Netanyahu,
by the way, I'm showing on the screen, Foreign Minister Araghchi's comment you made there with Prime Minister Sharif's text underneath it.
Yes, exactly. So it was there. Anyway, after the call from Netanyahu, it was stopped, and then Netanyahu did this massive carpet bombing of Beirut and in the south to demonstrate clearly that there's no ceasefire in Lebanon. So what is going on? What are the Israelis or the circles around Netanyahu are aiming for? Well, first of all, they have a minimum demand, which they are pressing hard on the White House at the moment, which is, they say, we want several more days in order to mount massive air attacks to destroy Hezbollah. I mean, that is a war crime as you described it, because, of course, Hezbollah isn't there out in the open. The Israelis themselves admit they don't know who is the leader of Hezbollah, the military wing. We know the political wing, but the military wing has gone completely, off radar. It has gone dark, and they don't know. So who are they killing? Well, they're killing mostly displaced people who've been displaced from the south and had to find temporary accommodation in Dahia. That's the suburb of Beirut, which has traditionally been a Shi'i suburb there. And they're destroying that, and they're trying to, and Alon Ben David, who is a military correspondent in Israel, was writing or speaking, I think it was on a talk show today, earlier this morning, and saying, rather frankly, that the purpose of this, because it's been accompanied by an attempt to say to the Lebanese prime minister, we want to have negotiations with you. We're going to open negotiations with you on the disarmament of Hezbollah and on normalization with Israel. Just for background, the Lebanese prime minister is has a noted antipathy to the Shi'i and to Hezbollah in particular. He is not a sort of even-handed person. The army, by contrast, are very frightened of these demands because, of course, it could lead to civil war in Lebanon, because the Shi'i are the 40–50% of the population, and they are very powerful. And he is frightened of a civil war. They have no ability to disarm Hezbollah, of course, no intent. But Ben David says very clearly in this, that's the intent, is to provoke a civil war in Lebanon. That's what they would aim for. And the other aim is to push Washington and Trump into what they put, and they put this, frankly, in this language, is that he's got to finish the job. He's got to continue the job of destroying Iran, reducing it to a sort of collection of ethno-sectarian mini-statelets, and to be weak and to be anarchic and with all of these statelets at odds with one another. It's the old plan, but that's what they're trying to do. And so I don't know whether there will be a negotiation at all, because the Iranians are working to these equations that are very simple, and they are this. It's either security for all or security for no one in the region. It's either prosperity for all or prosperity for no one. By no one, they mean the Gulf in the region either. So the bottom line really is Netanyahu cannot afford the strategic defeat. America suffered a strategic defeat, but the consequence of this is Netanyahu is suffering a strategic defeat. He has achieved none of the objectives that he set for the war with Iran. None of them, contrary to what Mr. Cooper was saying, that there's no change in terms. One of the 10-point plans is the demand by Iran to continue to enrich uranium in Iran. He has not succeeded in ending their missile dominance. In fact, Iran may not have air dominance, and Israel doesn't have full air dominance by any means, superiority over Iran. Nearly everything has been achieved by standoff munitions rather than direct bombing.
And in fact, I'm showing a screenshot here. This is the aircraft that we have lost over this allegedly perfect environment here. Some of those have been hit on the ground, but these are the aircraft that we've lost as of, I guess, about a week ago.
Yes, and now there's been the loss of one of the latest drones that appear to has crashed into the sea. I can't remember what it's called, but it's
MQ-9 Reaper.
Yeah, something like that. But it flies at 55,000 feet, so people had thought they were safe from Iranian air defenses. And this is just so. I mean, that particular drone, as I say, I forget its proper name, its designation, but apparently costs about 500 million each. It's the most sophisticated and high, and so they've just downed one of those. So I'm just saying, Netanyahu is really feeling pressured. He's on the rocks. Trump is on the rocks, but Netanyahu is under real pressure because Israel is bitterly divided now on this whole program. And they're saying, I mean, first of all, it's a strategic disaster for Israel. And it's not me saying this, but the chief of defense staff is saying, that the IDF is on the point of collapse. And he went to the cabinet meeting and said, I'm flashing 10 red lights. We just are on the point of collapse. We cannot continue like this. And as I've tried to explain before, the IDF is the sort of spinal cord of Israel. It's because, everyone serves in it. They do their service in the IDF. You can be secular, you can be religious, you can be right or left. Everyone spends some period in the IDF. And that spinal cord is breaking and collapsing. And there's real anger now at Netanyahu and the leadership, the political leadership, because they say, you failed in Iran. I mean, they at least say it in the Hebrew editions clearly, in this language. You failed in Iran. You have failed in Gaza. Because after all this time, what's changed? Hamas is still there. They're still in control of Gaza. What have you achieved there? What have you achieved in Lebanon? We were shocked. We thought you had told us that Hezbollah had been so weakened during the period from the pager episode and the exploding walkie-talkies that they were, on their knees. And then they've come back and they have been lacerating us in the north of Israel. I mean, and that really is the case. I mean, they've lost more than 100 tanks in this last period. I mean, Merkovas have been, and many of them have with their crews too, large numbers of casualties. They've been trying to establish a buffer zone on the south of Lebanon, about 7 or 8 kilometers in. Bin Jabal, I think, is about on that sort of limit. And they want to raise every house in that period, like Gaza. Everything destroyed. They've been going through laying explosives, just destroying village after village. But even that is becoming a source of huge dispute in Israel because the military people are saying, what's the point of a 7-kilometer buffer zone when Hezbollah are firing missiles into Tel Aviv from north of the Litani? The Litani is that river that forms a sort of border, if you like, between the south and the north of Lebanon. And he's saying,
the Litani river near the purple line.
There you are. That's it. There you see it. So 1/3. He's saying they're firing from north of that river into Tel Aviv, into the northern territories of Israel. So what good is, demolishing all of the villages for 7 kilometers there? Because you still have Hezbollah, you still have the Radwan special forces of Hezbollah, and they are extracting, a huge damage, huge casualties, and imposing great damages on the north. So Israel is in dire straits. And although, and I perhaps thought of this as a contrarian view to express, but it is that I think that although at the moment Netanyahu is projecting huge bluster and claims of success, rather like in parallel with Trump's, but in practice he has suffered a major defeat, because all his projects are going down to a defeat. He's achieved nothing in Iran. He's achieved nothing with Hezbollah, nothing in Gaza. And elections are coming up this year. And he's got his court case coming up, I think, fairly shortly, the corruption cases that he's facing in court. And he's desperate. And this desperation was reflected in what happened in Lebanon in these last 2 days. He wants to keep the war going with Iran, to get Americans to fight this war for him so that he can get reelected. This is as cynical as it gets. American lives should be lost in order that he should get his election confirmed.
And let's take a look at that, because there's two sides to this issue here. You just laid out in stark detail, really kind of disturbingly, how President Trump and Vice President Vance, and working with the Pakistanis, who were apparently the Chinese, were also heavily involved, is trying to get a ceasefire, to get this, at least the fighting part, off the table. And then you showed how the Israeli side absolutely undercut that. And so far, there hasn't been any results or any pushback anyway from the United States. But there's another problem on our side of this equation here. I'd like you to talk a little bit about this. Let's just take a look at the first one here. This is the live tracker on the oil price right now. And you see it's staying up here, even though we got this thing off and got the, at least this claim of a somewhat of a ceasefire, or a pause, maybe even better way to put it. But that hasn't dropped the price very much. And then you have the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is still closed. This did not open it up. So President Trump said last night, there were reports that Iran is charging fees to tankers going through the Hormuz Straits. They better not be. And if they are, they better stop it now, which was a pretty tepid thing to say. And then here now we have oil industry executives are pleading with the White House to please do whatever you need to do to get this get this off, and don't let them have, set up one of those tollways kind of things where they charge tolls, as a solution to this. But the problem is, Alastair, that the strait is closed. Still, I think only 6 tankers made it through yesterday, and I think only 2 of those were oil tankers. So you have this dearth of like 14 million barrels a day continue to be removed from the or deprived rather from the global marketplace. That's causing huge problems in Asia. It's about to cause huge problems in Europe. And of course, it's causing all kinds of problems in the Middle East. And I think, as you've mentioned before, maybe bigger issue is the urea and the fertilizer feedstocks that are not coming out, that are now having ramifications all over the world, even in Africa. So those are pressures that are building. So President Trump can't just let Netanyahu run and try to keep the war going. He can't bomb his way to victory. Where does that leave the United States right now?
It leaves them in a terrible dilemma, because they need an off-ramp from this war. But they have still failed to understand the Iranian motives in this war. I'm sorry to say that. I think it's beginning to drawn through to them. Is what the Iranians intend to do is to blow up the existing paradigm, completely explode the paradigm. What is the paradigm? That is the paradigm that has existed from the 70s of, if you like, caging Iran, not caging it in the way in which Hamas is caged in Gaza with physical fences and drones flying overhead. But look at the map. Iran is completely surrounded by US military bases, completely surrounded by military bases. It has been sanctioned since, if you like, that embassy hostage siege. It is sanctioned, it is tariffed, it is besieged economically, it has UN sanctions against it, it is culturally ostracized, politically isolated, and the Iranians intend to break out of this imprisonment, this containment. And they're going to do it using Hormuz, because the reality is that Hormuz, if it's shut for another 3 weeks or so, will exert huge pain on the United States and more so on Europe. And what the Iranians are doing is not just, and you mentioned that, but then there are all these other elements. I mean, it's really sort of a reflection of what the Chinese did. When Trump put 155% tariffs on China, President Xi, he said, well, actually, we are not going to be exporting our rare earths and some of those metals and precious metals and things you need for your military supply lines and for your tech products. And we're putting restrictions on those, and suddenly things changed. Well, Iran, if you like, is following the same path, because the supply lines of Europe and America depend on things like helium, sulfuric acid, all the things that pass through Hormuz. They haven't closed Hormuz completely. They've closed it from the moment that Trump said, no, Lebanon was not involved in this process. And that went against their 10-point plan. But the week before, about 22 tankers were going, and they were paying a toll, a fee. I don't see why it's such a problem. If you want to sail the Red Sea, I mean, you have to pay Egypt a toll, because you have to use the Suez Straits, if you like, at the other end. So it's not something that is so novel and rare. So they are going to continue, and the point of that is the time limit is short. The Iranians only have to keep Hormuz shut or tightly controlled for 3 weeks, and then the pain is going to be evident in stock markets and in tech company share prices, and in things even like food, is going to start to be reflected. And so, yes, they are going to inflict pain, and the pain is intended to say to President Trump, you have to bite the bullet. We are going to leave this containment. We are going to break the paradigm, and you have no ability to stop it, because we control Hormuz. You're very welcome to try and open it. I mean, they're literally offering the United States to say, come and bring your troops. You're welcome. Come into our parlor. Land on Iran on the north side of Hormuz and find out what the geography is like there. They are in a strong position. And as I said to you, actually, they're in a stronger position than after the 12-day war, not only because their missiles are largely intact, but also they haven't suffered the same casualties as in the 12-day war, because they emptied all of the buildings. All of the buildings were emptied, all of the public buildings, only the hospitals remained. And of course, Israel has been bombing some of those. But I mean, everything was empty. I think they say they probably had 2,000 to 3,000 deaths. I mean, no one really knows, because people are under rubble and things. But it's not, it's not being catastrophic as is being presented by people on certain news channels. as being, you know, oh, they've been suffered, their military has been degraded, they've suffered. Well, you heard Admiral Cooper saying all that, you know, that we've prevented them. All of that is just lies. And the problem is that, you know, it makes it so much more difficult for the United States to look truth in the eye and say, how do we get out of this mess? How are we going to get out of it? And the answer is that they have to talk seriously with Iran about ending. You know, we fall into it. It seems, oh, yes, more sanctions. We'll have to have inspections about missiles. We'll have to have the whole paraphernalia of containment and of siege. And Iran is not going to accept, if you like, to end up like Syria. You know, more and more tariffs, more and more economic siege, slowly eroding the well-being of the Iranian people, so that people can't lead a normal life. And they are determined to break the paradigm. And if that means causing chaos on markets, so be it. That's how they regard it. I mean,
so let me ask you. So there's about to be, at least they're scheduled, talks in Islamabad starting tomorrow. What do you expect to happen? And as I ask that question, let me show you what the vice president, who's going to be leading the American delegation, this is what he said just a little bit ago on his way to that meeting.
We're looking forward to the negotiation. I think it's going to be positive. We'll, of course, see, as the President of the United States said, if the Iranians are willing to negotiate in good faith, we're certainly willing to extend the open hand. If they're going to try to play us, then they're going to find that the negotiating team is not that receptive. So we're going to try to have a positive negotiation. The President has gave us some pretty clear guidelines, and we're going to see.
And let me just ask, just right off the top, we're asking the Iranians to negotiate in good faith. Now, our track record in the last 9 or so months is about as heinous as it can be on good faith negotiations. I mean, let's just start with that. How is that going to set the stage for whatever may happen in Islamabad?
No, well, I mean, you know, look, I think that the vice president has been working quite hard against, if you like, the grain of the White House to try and get some sort of talk started. Not with a great deal of success, I think. But I mean, I believe he was up all night last Friday trying to get something started. So, I mean, but he starts off by saying they've got to negotiate with us. They still don't get it. The 10 points are not, you know, the basis for negotiation on nuclear things and this and that. These are, as Iran says, preconditions for negotiations on a lasting ceasefire, which means an end to conflict. If you like, make a comparison with Russia and what, you know, was the situation within Russia. Witkoff and Kushner went there to hold negotiations, was endless toing and froing and papers circulating amongst the Europeans, which were never shown to the Russians. And then the Russians said, we're not having a ceasefire. We want security and an end to this conflict. We want a full solution. We want to know where the boundaries between the sphere of influence of NATO lies and where our sphere of interest exceeds. What is the boundary between these two things? And we need the security architecture to maintain it. And that is what the Russians are saying. And it's rather parallel to what the Iranians are saying. They're saying we've had it with, you know, just as, you know, Russia has been, if you like, unable to achieve a security understanding with the United States because the Europeans keep pressing or insisting that their proxy, Ukraine, continue the war against Russia, so there can be no solution in Russia. And here we have Iran wanting, saying we have to have an enduring solution, which doesn't mean going back to tariffs, sanctions, you know, restrictions on everything, on the nuclear program. We're breaking out of that and you have to accept it, or else there will be a certain amount of economic pain that will follow for these. These are preconditions, the 10 points. They're not just, oh, let's talk about nuclear things now. And this is what I think will happen. I think this is, I mean, first of all, as far as I know, before I started talking to you now, I hadn't heard that the Iranian delegation had even left Tehran, because they said if it's not security for all, it's security for none. So Lebanon is part of the equation. If you don't accept the equation, no negotiations. If there are negotiations, I think, then I predict that what will happen is, seeing that this is going to play badly for Trump and for the White House in the lead up to the midterm elections, suddenly we'll have, yes, well, now we need to talk about enrichment. And, we want you to give back the 340 kilos. And then we'll talk about gradual lifting of sanctions. You can lift sanctions, a little bit by little, depending on your behavior, depending on your conduct. Maybe we'll lift a few more, maybe not. The Iranians are not going to buy that. Why should they? They've been through that so long with the JCPOA, when sanctions were supposed, were sort of supposed to be lifted in certain areas. I remember at the time after Trump left the JCPOA, technically the Europeans were supposed to go on trading with Iran on the basis of the JCPOA, but that was stopped. So it was breached from the very beginning, the JCPOA, by the United States in the Euro 3, to be absolutely clear about it. So they're not going to accept, Vance coming and saying, yes, but, we have to make sure we can't allow you to have a nuclear weapon. And they're going to say, well, actually, we haven't got one. And we've always said, it's you that's pushing us towards a nuclear weapon, just as you did with North Korea. But we have no intention of doing that, and we can give undertakings, but not based on tariffs, sanctions, penalization, more siege. No, it's either we have an agreement or not. I don't think this is understood, and therefore I suspect that we will, in the not too distant future, we will find that Israel has resumed its attacks on Iran, and that then the United States will follow. And as I said to you, you will be doing this, largely putting American lives on the line, largely because it's part of the Netanyahu calculus for winning the election, which he must do, otherwise he goes to prison, because that's likely to be the consequence of his judgment in the court cases for corruption. So, I mean, is the United States leadership, as it is presently, I mean, I'm not talking about the United States in the bigger sense, but is it capable of doing this? And does it really have the agency to act, if you like, in a way that is going to curb Israel from demanding that the war, or provoking the war to continue by some exercise of power, further attacks in Gaza? I mean, by the way, the period for disarmament of Hamas ends, I think, today or tomorrow. So we'll probably see then not only Lebanon being attacked, but we'll see massive attack starting again in Gaza. And do you think the Iranians are then going to sit down with Witkoff and Kushner and Vance and say, okay, let's talk about these things?
And one wonders why would the Iranian side sit down with that delegation that Gary just showed you up on the screen there? Vice President, that makes sense. But I mean, these are the two guys, Witkoff and Kushner, that were sitting in the last one when the Iranians made a tremendous concession and said they would be willing to go to zero enrichment and, prove that they were not going to a bomb, et cetera. And then those two guys then went on American TV and lied about it and said that the Iranian side was actually boasting that they could make 10 nuclear weapons and all this kind of stuff. Why would they now sit down with those two guys, or will they?
I don't know that they will. As I say, they haven't left yet, as far as I know. They may have. Maybe they will sit down, but if they are presented with, the 15-point plan of Witkoff, then I expect they will head back to Tehran. I think one of the ironies, again, in this, well, we've won the war, is the thing, well, we've decapitated the old guard and it's now changed and we've succeeded. It's not only one, we've had the second and we're now on the third, and that they are much more accommodating. No, they're not. They're much more hard-nosed. These are the products of war. They fought with the Iraqis. They understand conflict. They're tough-minded people who are in charge. And yes, you can't see them, because that was the whole point of the Mosaic system, was to have it all, the command system, the military command system, decentralized and dispersed across the country with system that works automatically. If Iran is attacked, then the system automatically responds, because they have sealed instructions that they open at the time of a decapitation strike, which tells them what action to take. And that this action was what happened after the killing of the supreme leader on the 28th of February. Immediately the attack on American bases in the Gulf started. It was all prepared. It was all in the plans. They've been preparing this for 20 years, this asymmetric war. They've been expecting it. It's an existential war. They do not want to go back to a deal. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. No.
So let me ask you this in the remaining time we have before we have to let you go. You have a lot of knowledge in the region. You have a very good understanding of the culture of Iran and their people and their system of governance, et cetera. There does seem to appear that there could be a risk for the Iranian side. They certainly have the military capability. We show the Yazd underground facility, which is apparently one of like 20 or 30 of those things spread throughout. So you're not going to be able to knock those things out. But there has been a lot of the targeting from both Israel and the United States over the last week, especially, that's been hitting civilian infrastructure that's necessary just to be able to have life on their country, like the processing facilities for energy, for fertilizers, aluminum, steel plants, things that you need to just have your population go to work, make a salary, be able to buy food, et cetera. Is there a risk that if this goes on too many months, that the Iranian side could have a problem just making its population survive? Is that a risk?
Well, first of all, I need 2 minutes or so to explain it, because the first thing is to say that in the first month of this war, the Iranian revenue from oil and gas that passed through Hormuz during that period is twice the level they've had of any previous months in the last years. It was double that. Just last Sunday, the Sunday before, there were 5 tankers that were loaded at Karg Island and passed through. And those had carried about 7.7 million barrels of oil, was equivalent to, it earned for Iran $850 million. One day just earned that. This is how they're going to rebuild the society and repair those bridges and railway lines that have been destroyed. They are going to use the Hormuz as the means. In a full year, they could take just a little short of $1 trillion from the tariffs on Hormuz. That's the first thing. Then I will say something that will appear very counterintuitive to what you've just said about maybe there's going to be a problem in Iran with, popular unrest. No, actually, what is going to be the problem that people are going to face, particularly the outside world, is it's igniting a resurgence of the feelings and the sentiments and the ideas of the Iranian Revolution, the earlier revolution. It is really bringing people together in an extraordinary way. You saw it when Trump made that statement, he's going to bomb all the bridges. What was the reaction in Iran? They all went and stood on the bridges. They surrounded the nuclear power stations. They stood there with their flags waiting to get bombed by America and by Israel. And there is really a sense of there's a feeling, you have to understand Iran has always had something of a revolutionary culture, way back from the time of Karbala and at the time of the death of the Prophet. But it also has a very strong sense. Its understanding of religion is quite different from many others in that it is believed to be incumbent upon human beings to support the oppressed, to fight oppression. And it is incumbent on human beings to look after the dispossessed, to show it. This was all the Imams' things. And the third element was to keep an active mind. So that, for example, in Iran, you have, you have universities that teach Islamic philosophy, but by the instruction of the first Imam, it was that they had to learn Western philosophy too. So you take someone like Ali Larijani. He is an expert on Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher. A world authority on it. At the same time, he can talk to you at great length about the 12th century philosopher Surughadi, who was killed, I think, in Aleppo around about that time. So, you're talking about it, quite a different civilization, a different culture. And that's where the secret of its resilience lies. They have been expected they anticipate suffering. They see the ability to sacrifice as a virtue, as something that you need to do in the name of justice, in the name of fighting oppression. This is why they support the Palestinians so ardently. It's not because they're ideological zealots or whatever the West wants to call them. This is why Israel hates them so much, of course, because, they call it out and they say, Jews live in Iran perfectly comfortably, but we do not accept that there should be special rights for one population group over another with whom they share the same territory. That is unacceptable. If you want to live in the Middle East, you have to accept the rules and the order of the region. Otherwise, you can't make special privileges for one population and keep the other oppressed and suppressed. So that is, this is why they are so resilient, and that's why they're so tough-minded about these things. And now they're in the process of trying to, it may go wrong. I don't know. I'm not a seer. But they are trying to explode the whole paradigm and change the system. They've been in it for 75 years, and they're going to break out.
Well, listen, you've just laid out a pretty compelling thesis here that says that despite all of our military advantages going into this on the spreadsheet, the application on the ground, because of humanity and culture and human spirit on various sides, seems to I have to agree with your entry point here, that Iran is on the ascendancy here, even despite all the bombs we've been dropping on them, because it looks to me like we're running out of those bombs. Number one, we're also running out of time because of other pressures that are now building on us as a result of our options here. And it seems to me that the necessity or the conditions for which Iran can come out ultimately victorious, or we can, who can last the longer. It seems like the threshold is lower for Iran to hang on than it is for us to hang on. Do you see it any different?
I see it exactly as you said it. They have only to wait a short period, 3 weeks or so, and then the economic pain will become very apparent, I believe. And then there will be a sort of grasping around in Washington saying, well, maybe we need to put boots on the ground then and take Hormuz or Karg Island. And we need to do that because we've got to do something before the midterms. And it'll be a catastrophe for the United States, for Europe, for the West as a whole. I mean, if you're digging a hole, stop digging. That's the only way to get out of it. Don't go on digging the hole. You're already in a hole.
That's some pretty sage advice that I hope the American delegation takes to Islamabad and then back to Washington, D.C. in the White House. But we'll have to wait and see. But as always, we're absolutely delighted to have you on today, and really appreciate this excellent information you've given us here. And we'll send people back here to the conflicts forum because you can keep up with Mr. Crooks here, especially as whatever does or doesn't happen tomorrow. If you want to know the impact of that, go straight here because I'm sure he'll have something there to explain it. We'll certainly be looking ourselves. So thank you very much. We always appreciate you coming.
Thank you for having me on your program.
And we appreciate you guys too. We probably will be having one more show this afternoon, something along the lines. We'll get the title here in a minute, but it's basically a big game of chicken right now between the United States and Israel and the Iranian side. And the question is, who's going to blink first? And there's some interesting information that I've got to share with you, and we'll come back with you that later tomorrow. And then always remember, we have the Daniel Davis intelligence brief that we have on every Saturday. So don't miss that tomorrow because that's going to give you the best of what we learned this week and the best of what happened overnight. So just be sure and see that. We'll see you tomorrow on the intelligence brief and back here later today on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You know, we don't have sponsors because we hate to hit you over the head with ads. I don't like them. So show a little love back. Subscribe, like, and send this to somebody you care about.